Hi, my name is McConnell. I'm going to give you a presentation today on what was referred to as the Moundville Rattlesnake Disk. Now, this disc is an artifact that came out of Mississippian culture. Roughly, the Mississippian culture itself roughly runs between 800 AD to 1600 AD, and the symbols that exist on this disc, its meaning, its use, the entire aspect of what it is, right, has kind of been a mystery for a very long time. And this has been my research been going on for close to 3 years. And now I'm going to be presenting to you what I found out and what I can realize it actually is. So this presentation should take about anywhere between 20 to 30 minutes. I hope you find it interesting, and I'd like to thank Dr. Van Poel for allowing me to give this presentation today. So let's get started. All right, this here is a map roughly of the Mississippian culture. Mississippian and what they call the Southeast Ceremonial Complex culture. This entire map is before you is a representation, shows you all the various different sites, major sites that were represented, which were had to do with Mississippian culture. The one that we need to focus on, therefore, is the one that's down in the right hand middle area of the down right hand middle of the screen, Moundville, Alabama. Now, the Moundville site is where the disc was found, and that site ran roughly between 1000 AD to about close to 15 to 1600 AD. And it's important as it's the second largest archaeological site for Mississippian culture in the United States. Definitely of North American culture, aside from Mesoamerica and the Aztec, the Mayans, and whatnot. This is also important because this is a mound culture. If you know anything about the mound building Indians, this was a group of Native Americans that we have been discussing for over several hundred years now. Various different writers have talked about them and the mystery behind them and how long they've been doing this for so long. And it is a really interesting aspect of prehistory, of the prehistorical world of Native Americans. So bear with me a little bit and we'll get into what the disc is about. Now, this is the disc itself. Hopefully, if you can see my laser pointer, it shows up here on the screen for you so you can follow around me what I'm doing. I'm going to cover some areas of the disc that's kind of important so you can get an idea, of rough estimate of what's going on. This disc is, first and foremost, it's about a foot wide, about an inch thick. It has 17 notches or bifurcations that go around the outside of it on this side. Well, they're on both sides. And on the flip side, you have 3 concentric rings that are carved there, and a mark here that we're not incredibly sure what that's about. We think it might be where, when it was originally found, it was hit by a plow, and this is the mark the plow left. That's at least what the mythology behind the disc says. As far as the rest of it is concerned, we have several motifs that appear to be on the disc etched in. We have the hand-eye motif in the center. The hand, we're not quite sure whether it's supposed to appear palms up or palms down. If you notice that there are fingernails at the top, but yet at the bottom here you have a line which shows perhaps maybe the palm itself. So it's ambiguous about how the artist itself was attempting to describe it. In the center you have an eye element that may or may not be a feminine symbol. We'll get to that in a little bit. Surrounding the hand, you have two snakes that appear to be tied together in knots in two locations, with a head with an eye surround on both. Those usually represent some variation for Native American, specifically Mississippian culture. This represents deity or a god. You'll notice that the rattlesnakes, because we can see the rattles on the end here, they're horned, and that the two different snakes there are two different kinds of snakes here. They're not the same rattlesnake. One has, there are two different markings. One see like a V-shaped marking, and the other one like an L-shaped marking. And we'll get to that in a little later on as we go. Now, here we have some Mesoamerican calendar discs. Now, the reason I'm showing you these calendar discs is because when the rattlesnake disc was originally found, the argument was by many researchers that perhaps this was something like a Mesoamerican disc that got brought up from the Aztec or the Mayans, whatever else, and traveled its way all the way to Alabama and got left. All right. Well, the researchers at the time looked at it. They looked at it very carefully. They checked the bifurcations of the outside of the disc. They checked the symbols, and they finally came to the conclusion that this was not a Mesoamerican disc. This was something else. And they said that basically this is an analogous artifact that was very similar, but it's not the same and is not connected with Mesoamerica, and it's not a calendar disc. Matter of fact, they argue that it probably was a paint palette of some kind or other, or it was some type of religious artifact, all right, meant for, I think one argument was that it was meant for creating contracts or to treaties between various different tribes. What they finally came to the conclusion was that it was not a calendar. Now I'm gonna get calendar disc. Now I'm gonna give you my thesis for this presentation. I say they're both wrong. Actually, I think that this is actually the Mississippian Rattlesnake Disk is a calendar disc. The only difference is it did not come from Mesoamerica. It did not come from Mexico. This is a calendar disc that was created in the Mississippian culture itself. And this is important because this is something that for a very long time we did not even realize that Mississippian culture had the capability to even do this. So this, in effect, is a calendar disc exactly like what the Mayans and the Aztecs had, except this was created literally in the Mississippian culture at Moundville. And I'm going to get to that in the next few slides. Here are some other discs that are associated with Mississippian culture. I show you these so you can understand that these discs are not unknown. I mean, they're not necessarily. We run into these discs occasionally. The first one is the Esquina disc, the Willoughby, and Mississippian culture disc with the OG mouth design. All three of these come from. This one comes from Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. However, they're rare. All right, they're extremely rare. There's only about 20 of these discs anywhere, and of the ones that are etched with markings on them, there's maybe about 5 or 6 altogether. So it's an extremely rare artifact that comes out of North America, and it's a rather mysterious one as well. So this is probably what attracted me to it as a researcher, trying to figure out the symbols behind it. Here's an artist rendition of the disc itself. I drew this, and I've already pointed out to you the eye surround motifs. There's a couple of things I want to point out. The L shapes on the back and the V shapes. Traditionally, under the literature, we refer to these as stair step markings and chevron markings. And the other thing I want to draw your attention to is that the horns on these snakes, these are rattlesnakes, you can see the rattles there. Rattlesnakes do have horns. There are several different types of rattlesnakes, both in the Southwest and down in Mesoamerica, Mexico area, that do have horns on them. However, the ones that come from the area where this disc was created did not. The rattlesnakes in this area do not have those. So that is a bit of a mystery into itself. The other aspect is these tails appear to be corn kernels, or at least that's how I'm interpreting them, and I'll show you why in a little bit. And that's important too, because if we look at the traditions, Native American traditions of the horned feathered serpent, which is a common deity amongst Native American traditions, they're always usually associated with corn. So that is something we have to take into account as perhaps a why you see corn kernels in the end here. Oh, one last thing. If you look at the tail, the tongues, the end of the tongues here and here, that's going to become up important as this presentation moves on. I just want you to pay attention to the positions there, right? And I'll explain to you in a little bit why. Here's some pictures of some artifacts that come from a variety of areas around the Mississippian SCCC, Southeast Ceremonial Complex culture. And the reason I'm showing you these is because I want you to notice that these symbols, the hand-eye motif, OG mouth, swastika, hands again, hand here, etchings around this, what we refer to as a gorget. All of these are common motifs. These are common symbols that we see in Mississippian culture. And this is important because Mississippian culture covers such a wide, humongous area. I mean, everything from roughly Oklahoma, eastern Oklahoma, all the way out to Florida, and as far north as Ohio, and as far south down to the Gulf. So this is something that is a huge, massive area that we're talking about, the mound builders of the Mississippi, the SCCC culture. And these symbols are incredibly important to them, and these are the symbols also that we see represented on the disc. Now here's the motifs themselves that I just mentioned. I'm going to go through these very quickly. The first one is what they call a petaloid motif. Basically, it's the flower petal motif. But the disc itself has the notches, and the thought by researchers is that that motif, the notches on the outside, it's supposed to represent either rays of the sun, or feather, or excuse me, or sun rays, or flower petals is the idea. The second one is a swastika motif. Now, don't get off into thinking that what I'm talking about is some variation of the 1930s, 1940s Nazi swastika. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is a symbol that is incredibly old and used by multiple cultures all across the world. It's actually, it represents movement of time. And we'll get a little more closer to that later as this presentation goes. The next, we were talking about this, the eye surround motif that's on this man's face here, representing deity. The OG mouth. The OG mouth may be a feminine symbol representing vagina. In reference to what I'm talking about, however, this probably represents the door to the spirit world. This is the doorway to the next world. Number 5 here, we have the striped pole. Now this is a little more complicated, but the striped pole is representative usually of the axis mundi, which is, if you know, okay, have you ever seen the movie Thor or any of the Thor movies? The Thor movies talk about Yggdrasil, the world tree. This is another common universal motif we see across cultures everywhere, where they see the world or their cosmos as a flat plane, and in the center of that flat plane is some type of pole in the dead center that sticks straight up and points directly up north to the point of position of the path of the soul, to the doorway of the spirit world. You see this In Norse culture, you see this in lots of aspects of European culture. You see this in Native American culture. You'll find this same cultural concept, this same cultural symbolism, pretty much a lot of places on planet Earth. And no different for Native Americans. They see the world exactly the same way. Number 6, we have the hand eye, and I make the argument that that eye in the center may be an OG mouse symbol. And finally, we have the horned feathered serpents, and again, 2 horns, eye surrounds, feathers on the back, all right, corncob tails, and spinning around in a swastika movement, spinning around a central point. And these are all important aspects, and we'll get to it as we go. Now, this is what many researchers argue the swastika actually represents, all right, in a variety of cultures, is the movement of the Big Dipper around the location of the central spot that the Earth spins around, which is as of right now is Polaris, the North Star. Because the Earth is on a wobble, and every 26,000 years we have this year of precession, and due to it, this position changes constantly. This star will change positions with another star as it moves, this wobble as it goes around. But what's important to note is that for at least the last couple of thousand years, we have had this configuration where the Big Dipper will move around this central location, all right? And on a nightly basis, this makes at least a halfway movement around. But where it ends up at the end of the night and at sunrise, you can tell for what time of the year you're in. So if it's in this position at sunrise, and this will be the fall, winter, spring, and summer. This is an artist representation by Jack Johnson that I've abridged somewhat to show the world tree, or axis mundi, on the flat plane, which is the Earth itself. At the top is the hand eye, the door of the spirit world, and the Milky Way, which in Native American, most Native American cultures represents the path of the souls. The Milky Way as it moves to this location for the doorway of the spirit world. And we see this again. This is one of those universal views of cosmology that you see quite often throughout all Mississippian culture, throughout most of cultures surrounding it, and you see this again, the world tree concept, pretty much everywhere around the world. Now, this is an interesting slide, and the reason being is the Bighorn medicine wheel, which is in Wyoming, is a humongous layout of rocks in a big wagon wheel. All right, it's roughly about 50 feet, 60 feet across, and what we've come to realize, a lot of researchers have realized that this is a way to chart stars. It's a way to pay attention to where the stars are at on a nightly basis, probably for calendrical purposes. Now, the reason we do this, or at least the reason that Native Americans do this, probably has to do with agriculture, meaning that they have to be able to chart, at the very least, have a fixed point on the calendar so they can know where they're at inside the time of the year. And the summer solstice, which is the longest day of the year, through the use of this layout, they can calculate exactly from due north, exactly the 60-degree angle where the sun will rise on its azimuth as it comes up, all right, on that position, to know exactly this is the summer solstice. So based on that, they can work out how much time they have for planting, all right, and this is important because corn, which is one of the main crops of Mississippian culture, needs at least 120 frost-free days to be able to plant. If we don't have that, then they're going to have a loss of crops, right? And you can't feed your people. So the calendrical system is incredibly important. Here we have the very same disc, and I've marked the bifurcations on the outside to the central point here on the disc, and then I overlaid it onto a compass here so you can see how it's laid out specifically. And you'll notice that east, west, and south are perfectly in alignment with a position that if you run straight through, you'd hit due north, all right? Which is kind of important because you'll notice that there's a reason for this. This is roughly 9 degrees off. It's a basis on this side here, and there's a reason for that, and we'll get to that in a second. But that 9-degree aspect of being off has a lot to do with the position of the North Star at that time frame this disc was made, and I'll explain that here in a second. But based on this and this blue line you see that runs across from this eye to this eye, this is an exact 60-degree angle. So if we had this marked perfectly right through here where the line would be for the north position, all right, and you can mark that through here with that blue line, you can tell you exactly where the sun's going to rise on the summer solstice based on that azimuth. And that is how this calendar actually works. Here we have the summer sunrise and sunset location for the summer winter solstice marked at 60 degrees here, because this is the path of the sun on June 21st as it goes around. This is the position it will rise, and this is the position it will set. And this from due north to here is a 60-degree angle. And this will represent on the disc a 60-degree angle as well, all right? So they know exactly where that position's at. Also, on the side, the flip side for the other eye of the other snake hits perfectly for the sunset of the winter solstice. So actually you can have 2 days that you can know exactly when it is that if you mark those perfectly on the calendar what those days are. Now, I taught you before about these markings on the snakes. The stair-step symbolism elements and the chevron elements. I say these represent the Big Dipper, these pipe-looking ones, or the L shapes, and the chevrons represent Cassiopeia as they spin around the North Pole in the center. And that's important because this can give you roughly 8 calendar months for each. And this lays out their entire calendar as it progresses through the year. And each one of these represents a period of roughly 20 days. And as this spins around, it's going to spin counterclockwise as it goes, just like the Big Dipper and Cassiopeia does, in opposite directions, each other spinning around. And that way you have the movement of the stars in the heavens going counterclockwise. Now, here is the actual star chart I laid out. Here's the Big Dipper, here's Cassiopeia, moving opposite of each other, both spinning this direction, going this direction, circular. The position of Polaris at this time frame, because we know that the civilization ran between 1100 and 1450 AD, maybe a little bit after that, but not much, no further than the 1600. But the civilization itself, they were at the site between 1100 and 1450. So we can calculate roughly, perhaps, where that when this disc was made, and we can do that by saying, okay, if the angle at the top of the disc is off by 9 degrees, we can look at here and say, okay, this is between 9 and 15 degrees here for where that Polaris would have been at due to the sun as it due to the wobble of the Earth, the great year, the precession. We can say, okay, if it's right here and it's 9 degrees off at the top, the way it's laid out, and they're marking the star specifically to the center of the where it's spinning from as it spins around. So that tells us that this probably was made, the disc was probably made around probably 1425 to 1450 AD. Now this is a guesstimation on my part. I wouldn't say this is an absolute, but this is my based on my analysis, what I think is actually going on. Finally, we had 2 stars. I should have pointed that out to you in the last slide. 2 stars, Capella and Vega, at the end of the tongues here and here. And it was on the last slide. I forgot to point it out to you. But they mark specifically why this calendar is in the positions is because that's where they're marking the tongues at in these exact positions which match up with the rest of the device. All right, for the North Star, for the line, for the summer solstice, for everything else, the positions where the Big Dipper with the thumb, with the Little Dipper would be with the thumb, the Big Dipper there, the Cassiopeia, and the movement, everything else perfectly as it moves around going counterclockwise. So in that regard, this is a representation of the North Star constellations by Mississippian culture. This is their cosmology of the North Star of these 2 snakes spinning around in space as they move. Now, this is a map of Moundville, the actual site itself, the archaeological site. We would assume that they're not going to have this disc out all the time. This is probably something that's a sacred item. It's going to be bundled, it's going to be put away, it's going to be taken care of by a specific family, whatever else, right? The shamans who use it to calculate when the summer solstice is going to be, they already know this information. They know where the stars are at. They've been practicing this their entire lives. But more than likely, the mounds themselves will probably reflect the actual positioning for the solstice or positioning of the cosmology. And that's exactly what we do. We see these 60-degree angles between this mound and this mound, this mound and this mound, from their positions, right, to show pretty much that this is, they're using these angles to be able to predict exactly when the sun's coming up on the summer solstice. Now the individuals, the individual tribes that were the inheritors of this information were basically 3 tribes that exist today. That would be the Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Cherokee. And all 3 of these tribes follow a tradition called the Green Corn Celebration, or Busk. And the reason this is important is because this is the celebration of the first corn. This is the celebration of when the corn is going to be taken out for the first time, all right, so they can all eat. And from that, you have this capability for them to, again, know when to plant crops, whatever else. So it's a big celebration for them. And this is something they celebrate every year. They still celebrate this very day in Oklahoma and across on the eastern and western sides of the United States, all right? When we talk about Cherokee in the east side or Cherokee in Oklahoma, or Choctaw, Chickasaw, both in Mississippi and Alabama and Oklahoma. They celebrate this every year. And whether they celebrate it on the 21st, June 21st, mattering on the tribe, the Cherokee don't really do it anymore, but they do still call that date incredibly important. They actually call it the Green Corn date in their calendar, which I find is amazing. But even though they still celebrate it later on in August, they still, which is probably a second planting, by the way, but I won't get into that. They still continue to keep doing this celebration to this very day. Finally, we have some symbols here. I talked about this before about the ends of the snake's tails that I think look like corn kernels. And I said before that the horned feathered serpent in most traditions in North America is representative of corn. Well, this is Quetzalcoatl from Mesoamerica, and he does represent. He's a corn god, and you can see at the end of his tails here, he has two corn kernels for his tail symbolism. All right, and this is the same symbol basically you see right here on the tails of these snakes. All right, so in reality, these snakes are a continued tradition of the continued tradition of the horned feathered serpent that we see from Mesoamerica, that we see across the Southwest, that made its way all up to Ohio and everywhere else in between, and is continuing Mississippian tradition, SEC tradition as well. This over here is another representation of that same tail. This is taken off of a brazier from Mesoamerica, and the same corn kernels for the snake tail. Well, that's it. That's the entire presentation. If there's anything else I would add, this has been a very rewarding research for me, getting to learn quite a bit about this particular artifact and being able to learn enough about it to interpret the symbols on this piece, which is not easy to do. It was a lot of time and effort, and I really hope you guys got something out of it, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. All right, and I hope everyone's doing well, and you all have a great day.